Here at Unexplained Reality, we support our troops and veterans 100%. Our family has a number of veterans, and my son-in-law is active duty serving our wonderful country. We have come across a great veteran-owned company called Awesome Bad Clothing. They have some very cool t-shirts and hats, and best of all, they are veteran-owned. So go check them out at awesomebadclothing.com and let them know you heard about them from Unexplained Reality. And when you go to checkout, type Unexplained in the coupon code box to get 10% off. Good evening, and welcome to Unexplained Reality, the podcast about the weird, strange, and unexplained but real. We are delighted to have you with us. Please grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and enjoy. Good evening and welcome to Unexplained Reality. I'm Brian Quinn, and with me is my son,
Harrison Quinn, also joining you today.
Yes, also joining us today.
And every other episode.
And every other episode. Every other episode. You're every episode. Not every other episode.
No,
every
I mean
episode.
this episode as well as every other episode that we've done. Not as in every other
that's
episode.
Not what it sounded like.
Well,
okay. Yes, you're right. Correct. So if you've had an encounter or an experience, or you just want to share a story with us, you can reach out to us at unexplained.reality@yahoo.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, our website, unexplainedreality.com. Get a hold of us and let us hear what you got to say. We'd love to talk to you, and nothing too weird for us. Bring it on. You got anything for us, buddy?
Not that I can think of, other than hope you guys have a good February. Have a good.
Well, it's almost over.
Yeah, hope you guys have had a good.
You're
February,
like 2 weeks late.
Continuing to have a good February.
Yeah, I had good Valentine's Day. Yesterday was like. No, that was Friday, wasn't it? Friday was Valentine's Day.
And as of tonight, tomorrow is President's Day. Hope you guys are enjoying President's Day.
That's right.
Yeah.
Celebrating your presidents.
Yep.
Past and future. President, I guess, if he's your guy.
Quite possibly the most radical thing any president has ever done. Ride in the pace car for the Daytona 500.
Which was actually his limo.
Yeah, the beast. Love him or hate him, he do be the pace car for NASCAR. So, or for the 500 at least.
And right now you hear a Chihuahua adding his 2 cents by scratching his bed. So
having an absolute fit.
He likes to start making noise as soon as we start recording.
He's going ham.
So, there was something that just came out recently. And I was like, man, the next episode we're going to have to talk about that. Hold on a second. Let me look up and see what this is.
Well, while you're looking that up, I want to cover a quick topic that I've seen. As a video came out, I can't remember quite who it was by, but it was a video saying that simple primates today have entered the Stone Age. That we're observing them kind of in their Stone Age, because there's more and more recorded cases of tamarins and chimpanzees and orangutans, and orangutans especially. There's been even years, 10-year-old footage, 15-year-old footage of orangutans using tools. Not as precisely as humans, but still using, tools. But the video was just, kind of emphasizing on especially small primates, which is kind of strange. The larger ones have been using tools for a while, but even smaller primates like tamarins and such have been using rocks, really. Rocks and sticks and nuts and, whatever they can find to accomplish complex tasks, which is, fascinating to me. But it kind of relates to the whole Bigfoot thing, as in, we're observing them use these tools to complete complex tasks, but we have really only been paying close attention to these primates for the past few years. They've been existing, doing their thing, in Africa and rural areas of Asia, where they're inhabited to, and they've been doing their thing for so long, and we've been kind of focused on developing civilization and technology. I mean, there's been wildlife researchers and these people who go out and that's their only life's, they do that. That's the only thing that they do. But, now it's a lot more mainstream with things like, Planet Earth, Blue Planet, all kinds of documentaries. The mass people want to see interesting stuff going on with wildlife, and the spotlights kind of come on to primates to show how, not how distant, but really how close they are to us. And I think that's something we're starting to cover in the Bigfoot arena, that they, not necessarily that they're starting to appear, but that we're paying closer attention to what's actually going on.
Oh yeah, well, there's a lot of investigators that claim to find these what they call nut cracking stations in supposed Sasquatch territories, and they are there. I mean, it's obvious that something has been, it's usually is like a stump or a big rock, and there's like a smaller rock, and there's remnants of nut shells been cracked, and so obviously something's doing that. A bear can't do it. A squirrel can't do that. Well, maybe a raccoon could. I mean, raccoons use their hands pretty well, but
yeah. Lots of rodents tend to use their hands, but yeah, that's really primates. I think is what it's coming down to, because historically primates have evolved or adapted and evolved in more of a manner that's less of bronze, less, we don't have super sharp canine teeth, we don't have fangs, we don't have claws, we don't, we're not particularly good at defending ourselves, but we have developed larger brains to find other solutions to,
right. Like a gun.
Yeah, like that,
My damn rifle.
We rely on tools and information as opposed to natural defense or things like that. So that's to me, that's really interesting to see that what's going on in the world, that we're really paying close attention, because I can't remember if it was one of the new documentaries, but it was either I think it was the Blue Planet, was one of the ocean episodes. It was a fish, and it would go out. It may have been a parrotfish, but I can't remember exactly what fish it was. But the fish, there was a certain type of fish and a certain type of coral that had a relationship. It wasn't symbiotic, but it was just a relationship. That this species of fish would seek out this species of coral because it grew in a particular shape and it had a jagged edge on it, and the fish would go and find clams and pick the clams up in their mouth and slam the clams against that particular jagged edge of the coral and bust the clams open.
Really?
Yeah, they would just slam it over and over and over again, and it was one of the very first cases of that species using a tool. But it wasn't just like this one fish figured out that this one rock works really well for busting open clams. It was, there's a case of this happening here and, on this side of the world, and the other side of the world where this fish is also inhabiting. It's happening in multiple places. Like it's
oh wow, that's wild.
Different colonies up and down. Maybe not on different sides of the world, but it wasn't just it wasn't
different locations.
Yeah, it wasn't an isolated incident. Yeah. So
Wow, that's wild. I hadn't heard that. Huh.
interesting stuff.
Yeah, I found the thing I was thinking about, and it was in it's in Hampton, Oregon. Um, Cattle mutilations. Imagine that. Police investigating after cows found mysteriously killed and not a single drop of blood in them.
Yeah, I heard something about that recently, but
Yeah,
I
it just
think
happened. This was posted February 11th.
there was one that happened in upstate South Carolina, but I think it was like
I
think it was
horses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it was people doing that.
yeah, it
I
was
think.
some Yahoo doing that.
Yeah.
This apparently this guy had some killings in 2019.
Yeah,
Or maybe this happened in 2019.
it's interesting to see strange things like that making their way into the kind of the public's eye. Things like the chupacabra and things like that are being more modernized, I'd say. Not quite
Yeah.
modernized, but more accepted. Less of a scary myth you tell your kids.
Well,
To more of
I don't
like a
think you
staple.
can say this is chupacabra when all the blood's gone and the wounds appear to be cauterized.
Oh no, I didn't know they were cauterized. I didn't know that. But
I don't know if this particular one was, but I know
I say
in
that
other cattle mutilations.
Well, I thought that was at least I thought that was a kind of a staple of chupacabra was that it drained all the blood.
Yeah, the draining of the blood was, but when they're cauterized, obviously there had to be some kind of mechanical or
Something advanced.
some advanced laser or some kind of heat, obviously to cauterize it. But the thing I find interesting with this is because it says these killings happened. They managed a huge piece of land. But these cows, the area where they were killed is actually U.S. Bureau of Land Management land. Which, yeah, I've always been, this is kind of I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I've always wondered, because like the whole area out there, where they did the nuclear testing, I've often wondered, it's like, could this be like the government just doing these tests on cattle to see if, because they did a lot of nuclear testing. The stuff that happened out there was crazy. If you read the book Area 51, I can't remember the author's name, but that book she went very detailed into the nuclear testing and what happened out there in the desert, and they had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah, and you think that with everything we know about nuclear and atomic energy today, we know the radiation and all that, the half-life of isotopes and stuff. We know how dangerous these things are, but back in the day, it was much more careless. It
was completely careless.
They knew the
crazy.
destructive power of, say, a nuclear bomb, but they didn't know the radiation. The effects of the long-term effects of the radiation that would happen after. Because if you look at like the Castle Bravo incident, if you mention that, not a lot of people like what is Castle Bravo, but it was a nuclear test. It was I believe it was off the coast of Japan, at a small chain of islands that a military base was on. I don't know if it was Army or Marine base, but there was a military base out there, and they had prepped it to withstand a nuclear launch or a nuclear touchdown of some sorts. They had a bunker where they had a few men inside of, like researchers and scientists and stuff. There's no point in putting infantry inside of a bunker just to see if they're going to live. But everything that they believed it was going to work, to the fullest extent. Just to think about that in itself is kind of crazy. They're so sure of themselves that they're putting humans in a bunker and basically dropping a nuke on them just to see, if that's going to work. But what happened was they used, I believe it was a compound of, not a compound, but something with lithium, I believe, between lithium-12 and lithium-14, something with the isotopes that they had. There was a certain kind of it may have been uranium. I can't remember the exact details of it, but it was they thought it was one thing, but really there was something that happened with the electrons or the ions or whatnot, and they miscalculated, and instead of the explosion being 2 megatons, it ended up being like 14. So
Jeez.
it was a massive miscalculation on their part, and all the people in the bunker survived, but they were trapped in the bunker because of the intense radiation that was in the area, and they'd set aside some of the oceanic area around it, but they only set out what would have been affected by 2 megatons of explosives.
Wow.
And really it was like, I think it was like 8 or 12, and I know one ship, there was a Japanese fishing boat in the area, and they got swamped with radiation.
Was this the testing in the Marshall Islands?
It may have. I don't think it was, because I know there was a testing in the Marshall Islands, but I believe this was a separate incident. But yeah, they'd evacuated Castle Bravo and everything, and I mean, it hit the Japanese boat, and they didn't get killed by the explosion or anything, but they were all exposed to massive amounts of radiation. I think everyone on the boat ended up dying.
Yeah, you're going to die eventually.
Within a month, within a week, I believe. They were all dead, but I mean, it's just crazy to see that they're so careless with nuclear testing.
Well, they did that in the desert out there in Nevada, wherever it was at. They did all this testing, and then they had security people that were right there. Would come back into the area like immediately, checking, running patrol and stuff. And all these guys are getting exposed to enormous amounts of radiation.
Yeah.
And going back to the cattle mutilations, that's what makes me wonder: do they still have this going on where they go out and they every so often check these animals,
for
clandestinely,
to
see what their levels are at, because
Yeah.
they're always taking like soft tissue. They're taking the eyes, they're taking the anus, the genitals, or something like that.
Yeah.
But Oregon, that's kind of weird. Why would you be way up in Oregon? But I guess
Yeah.
that exposure is that whole
And it,
western side of the United States. I mean, I don't know. It's just a theory, but
Yeah.
anyways, that was that came up, and I was like, wow, that's something you don't see very often anymore. Is these cattle mutilations? I mean, they still come around every once in a while, but I hadn't seen one in a while. So, anyways, you got anything you want to chat about? Anything else?
I think that's it for me.
Okay. Well, tonight we're going to go ahead and roll right into it. Hopefully everybody's got a drink, goes use the bathroom, do whatever, because this is we had a good discussion with Trey from the Squatch Me Now Instagram. He runs the Squatch Me Now Instagram account, and he also has a site at squatchmenow.net. Very knowledgeable. We had a great discussion on the whole phenomena of Bigfoot, and not just Bigfoot, Sasquatch, but really the whole, every continent, a lot of countries have their own similar type phenomena. You have the Yowie in Australia, you have the Yeti, you have the Almasty, you have a ring pendek. They all fall into the same category, and that's kind of what we started off with. And we just had a great discussion about the whole subject matter and different variants of it, and we spun off on a few other tangents, but it was great, and we're definitely going to get back together and have a discussion with him further. And but anyways, we'll roll you guys into it and let you have a listen. So we'll just, like I said, we'll just have an open discussion here. We'll just chat.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I'll let you introduce yourself and give your contact information to start with, and then we'll go into it.
Sure. My name's Trey. I manage the Instagram account Squatch Me Now. We also have squatchmenow.net, YouTube page, and a Facebook page. I can be reached by email at instasquatch@gmail.com. And basically, our page is just sort of a open forum for discussion, and where we post what I think is some of the best um, evidence for relic hominids. So, I mean, that's sort of where we're coming from with the Sasquatch Bigfoot phenomenon theory, is that we're dealing with a wide variety of regionalized relic hominids across the planet. Um, you know, anthropology is showing us that one time between somewhere 2 million to 6 million years ago, we were dealing with a planet of the apes, a wide variety of early human ancestors that were all living at the same time. And so the ideas that we're seeing now in the Bigfoot phenomenon, relic populations of these creatures, and in some cases, not even, relic may not even be the right word, because I feel like what we're looking at are creatures that have continued to evolve and adapt and interbreed and hybridize, and so they're probably not exactly what was existing um, in the days of early humans. It's probably something different altogether. But sort of that's my approach to this phenomenon that we're dealing with in terms of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yeti or Yahweh or Yeren or whatever it is specifically, wherever you are in the world that you're seeing.
Right. I mean, you have because you have like the rain picking deck, and
Right. Yeah.
even here in the U.S., I said there's different types. People claim to see different features on in different areas. So
Yeah, and
it's
that's
pretty
something I try
interesting.
to. Yeah, that's something I try to address on our pages on social media. I'm actually have a video production and marketing backgrounds of a marketing company and we specialize in social media. So I thought, bringing this subject to Instagram, to YouTube, to Facebook, to these social media platforms was a good way to reach out and sort of fit um, my business and my expertise. Um, and I think that one of the biggest problems we have right now in the Bigfoot community um, is that everybody's arguing about, is it more ape-like, is it more human-like, does it walk like this, does it walk like that, is it this size or this color or that color, whatever the case may be. And in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, is that it's all of it. Now, is every video and every encounter story and all that, are they all true, are they all real? Of course not. But to say, to be arguing about whether this track is a proper Bigfoot track, or how do they move, or what do they sound like? I mean, if we're dealing with a variety of early hominids that have then adapted and hybridized and interbred with humans, and Neanderthals and Denisovans and all these other types of hominids that existed at the time, possibly Gigantopithecus or whatever the case may be, then they're all going to look a little bit different if they've adapted. You brought up Homo florenzius, or you brought up Orang Pendek. Homo florenzius is something we have, obviously fossil evidence of in that exact same area of the world that's very similar to what people are now seeing as Orang Pendek. So the thought would be that that's probably, it didn't die out 10,000 years ago, as anthropologists want to say, because those are the most recent fossils they found. But we're actually dealing with a relic population that's still alive. They're on the island of Flores and in other areas of Southeast Asia. And, if you look at all these creatures fit certain biological rules, as far as, it's a smaller creature on a hot little island down in the South Pacific. That makes just as much sense as having these much larger creatures reported in the Northwest the United States and Canada, where they're said to be much larger now. Is that entirely all adaptation to environment? There may be more that what's existing up there is a relic population of Gigantopithecus up in the Pacific Northwest, as opposed to this Homo florenzius that was down in the island of Flores. So we're dealing with a lot of different creatures all over the planet. So if we're all arguing over this is Bigfoot or that is Bigfoot, we're sort of missing the point and the bigger picture here, which is it's all that sort of lumped together into that Bigfoot, category, or sort of cliche name. I had someone tell me the other day on Instagram that that footprint's not big enough to be a Bigfoot footprint.
That's funny.
Do they all come out 10 feet tall?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Are they born 10 feet tall, or are they just popping out the ether in that way? No, that's obviously something that people talk about. But are females the same size as males? Are youth the same size as adults?
Yeah.
Probably not, right? So
That's right.
So these are just silly things for us to be arguing about. We need to be looking more at sort of the bigger pictures, to trying to figure out, what sort of subspecies of early human are we dealing with in these different regionalized areas, and what aspects of those environments would be relevant to their adaptation, and what sort of adaptations, physically and otherwise, might be relevant based on that environment. And then, the question goes to, well, where are they? Well, I think one of the first posts I made was a comparison map of Bigfoot sightings to cavern systems, and it's a perfect overlay in the United States. So,
Yep.
I mean, cavern systems exist all over the world. A young kid was sending me messages on IG the other day talking about there can't be any in the UK because there's nowhere for, we would have found them by now. Well, there are reports in the UK, and you guys have a lot of caves, and we know so little about sort of, I don't want to get into the whole Agartha thing, but as far as inner Earth's concerned, if you're just talking about general cave systems, so many cave systems are unexplored. And then we have, 700 million acres of wilderness above ground in the United States. And then, how these guys are they, people tend to think, oh, I've heard this too, Bigfoot's not smart enough to hide from us. Well, just because it hasn't, it's a human that hasn't crutched on technology and civilization. Maybe they're mentally developed in other ways than we are. So to say that they're not smart just because they don't think necessarily in the same way that modern human does, I think is narrow, a narrow view of this whole situation. I think, we're probably dealing with something that's almost more, I don't want to say more human, but more Terran, more adapted to living on Earth in its natural state than we are. We've certainly, as the human race, crutched on living in these tight groups and fortified villages and cities and beyond that. And it makes you wonder sometimes, is this phenomenon part of the reason why we fortified ourselves into these tight little groups, because physically we were no match,
Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think? What's your take on this subject? I'm very curious to hear what other people have to say.
I think you're right, spot on with the fact that just within the quote unquote Bigfoot community, you have so many people wanting to be experts and projecting their thoughts on what it is actually being fact. And I think you're you hit the nail on the head when this is far bigger than quote unquote Bigfoot in the U.S. and there's so many different areas across the globe that have their own version of quote unquote Bigfoot, And yeah, I agree. I mean, either you know what's happening, closer to the equator, and what's happening further, closer to the Arctic Circle. Those creatures are probably related, but is it a, who knows? Is it a product of its environment? Further north, you have a lot more wilderness, you have bigger game, you have more rugged country. Are they bigger there because of that, or is it, breeding, or their bloodlines? But and I don't know. What do you think, Harrison?
I mean, I agree with my father on what you said. I agree completely. But though your point of view is something that I've very rarely seen that brings a lot of logic, and a lot of logic, but a lot of stop worrying about the specific details. I mean, details are important, but like you said, footprint size could vary because of gender differences or age, or some might just be taller than others. Not all humans are the same size. It just depends. But there's a lot of kind of bickering, and yeah, like my dad said, everybody wants to be experts, but you never know. I mean, there's been evidence of species of birds that have been separated, the same colony of the same species of birds that have been separated onto two different land masses, and that have adapted differently, and started to become two kind of divergent species of, from the same common ancestor, but adapting differently to their environments. So to say that, all Bigfoots around the globe aren't the same because people make different things up in different places, to me just is false. But
yeah, and I think it's false too, because I mean, you've got thousands of witnesses, and probably many more that don't even come forward, and many of these people are claiming to see creatures that are far different than the Patterson-Gimlin creature. You see the chimpanzee type, you see some that claim it was a Neanderthal. You have others that say it had a snout and was, some kind of dog man or baboon looking creature. So, I mean, it's just like the encounter you just posted on your blog in North Carolina. I mean, that was obviously it sounded like a baboon type.
Right. Yeah, that's what I thought when she was. And I honestly don't even know her name. She wrote on IG, and her actual name wasn't on IG. And I did ask her about recording her account, and
Right.
she wasn't interested in doing that. Stuff I didn't include was she talked a little bit about how people in that area were most likely not interested in talking about this subject that much. But it's we're dealing with a lot of different things, a lot of different types of creatures, I think. And I do. What do you guys think on that? There's like a type 3, maybe. They talk about different types. But I mean, do you think the Dogman accounts are more related to that baboon looking type of Bigfoot, or do you think the Dogman's something altogether?
I think it's something different.
Yeah,
Myself. Yeah, I think
okay.
there's I mean, what was the I mean, there was, I can't remember what the name of that is. There was a place in Michigan where this man took this picture, like a waterfall or something, and you can see a creature standing down, a ways down from him. I can't remember what the name of that picture is. It's got is it Cuyahoga Falls or something like that? I don't know, but it's a there's a creature down there, and it appears to have like something white in its arm, and it also has a snout. I mean, you can see a snout on the creature. To me, that is, I don't think that, I think that's more of a baboon type Bigfoot.
Right.
But then you have people that see what I would consider a dog man, which they say is like a wolf that stands up on its back legs.
Yeah.
So I think they're two different creatures.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Beast of Seven Shoots, and
That's it. That's it.
Seven
That's
Shoots
exactly it.
back.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. That's an interesting picture. It certainly looks like a big baboon,
Yep.
which is scary because baboons are kind of scary looking creatures, when they're 3 feet tall or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
So to take one and make it 7 feet tall plus, Not scary, but yeah, it looks like it's got a little white dog, uh, under its arm, which is reported a lot.
Yep.
I heard a story the other day. One walking out. I think it was on Sasquatch Chronicles.
Right.
Walks out and it's got a little white dog in its arm. So yeah,
That's wild.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of, people having encounters and said it was traveling with like a pack of coyotes. I mean,
yeah, that's interesting, right?
yeah. I mean, that's an interesting interaction there. I
Right,
mean,
but it's similar to humans, right? I mean,
right.
we domesticated dogs.
Yeah.
That started somewhere. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I asked that question on the IG one time too. Basically, does Bigfoot have pets or other symbiotic relationships with other animals?
I believe
So,
I believe it's definitely possible. I mean,
sure.
just from I've heard that I've heard that more than one time. I've heard it several times where people have encountered a Sasquatch and that they claim that it had coyotes or wolves with it and that they seem to be together.
There's a lot of conversation around them making similar type noises, right? Type calls and like vocalizations where it almost sounds like they're talking to each other or something along those lines, or they're trying to emulate coyote sounds.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
But, there's a lot of, I mean, that seems to be one thing that a lot of these creatures have in common is the ability to mimic. I don't know if you've listened to OK Talk. Those guys have a site that they go out. They talk about a bunch of different stuff on their show, but they got contacted or somehow gotten involved with these people that live. I think it's on the Olympic Peninsula. But anyways, this man and woman bought this house. It was their dream retirement house. It was up in the mountains in the rainforest, and they purchased this house and moved into it and were doing work, and they started having weird stuff happening around the house. And the woman, one day when they were coming back from town heading up to their house, they lived like 8 miles in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have any, they were 8 miles from anything. And as they were traveling up the dirt road or whatever up to their house, she saw a Sasquatch standing there with his hand on a tree, like around the tree was looking, and she freaked out. Well, the interesting thing about this woman is I guess she was a wildlife photographer for like 30 years with National Geographic, and she's been all over the world. She'd be out in the field for months tracking and taking pictures and stuff of different animals, endangered and wild animals. And so she sees this and she says, I've seen all kinds of animals all over the world, and I'm telling you, this is nothing I've ever seen or even knew existed. And but further on, as their story went on, they lived there for a while and they kept having all these encounters and weird stuff happening. And they actually got in contact with I can't remember what the guy is for the. Oh man, I should have. What is this? I don't know. He's like an audio specialist. So he came out and he works with like the Olympic Project or something like that. And He came out and he did set up all these recorders and stuff. And they got mimicry where they were outside and like 2:00 in the morning, you can hear their dogs being called from the woods. It's crazy.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
yeah, it's not like, they're out there calling the dogs, but it sounds like some big something out there that is trying to,
lure the dogs.
Yeah, it's trying to lure the dogs. Obviously, it's not exact match, but it's freaky to hear this coming out of these woods,
Oh, yeah.
But
I mean, yeah, I've heard that with, calling people and kids, or, the same kind of thing. It's not exactly the right sound, but, it sounds like someone's calling their name because, if they're watching you, they're
Right.
watching your property and you're calling each other, you're calling your wife, you're calling your kids, and, they're trying to mimic that to lure them out, I guess, for whatever purpose they have. That's creepy, right?
Yeah. How many times have I heard somebody say, "Oh yeah, well, heard this owl call, and it was crazy. It was an owl, no big deal, but it sounded like it was a 400-pound owl." And I've heard that many, many times, probably a dozen times, where people have said that they heard that, when they were out in the woods or camping or whatever.
Yeah, that's scary. That's
Yeah.
certainly scary. More just the unknown of what the motivation is there.
Yeah, I mean, and it brings into, I guess, into view, a lot of people, you get into like the missing 411 and people claim that, oh, well, obviously it's, a lot of people believe it's Bigfoot, some believe it's aliens and stuff like that. But I mean, so that does bring into, why would they do this mimicry? Are they trying to lure something in, or are they just, is it for fun, or is it more sinister,
Sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe they just want a better look at you, or maybe they want to eat you.
Right,
Something
right.
I was just talking to somebody earlier, and they, you're talking about that. If you look at like the wild woman of the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and you look at Krampus, the legend of Krampus in Europe,
Right.
they both have parallels with a big, ugly, hairy creature that carries a basket on their back and scoops up kids and throws them in the basket. I think the wild woman of the woods, they talk about she has pine tar on her hands for the little assisted adhesive when you're scooping up the kids. But
Right.
overall, they're pretty close in description. So there's certainly some similar behaviors across the board. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting subject, and I'm glad you guys are of the same mindset that we're dealing with something that's a much bigger picture. And you're right. I mean, no one's an expert on this.
No.
No
No.
one is, until we can get people out in the field and study this. Um, it's no one's going to be.
No.
And I think one of the interesting things you brought up, that this woman had the sighting that you were talking about earlier, who was a wildlife photographer. It's been years out on the field. I mean, that's something we're not seeing in the study of this. And when people say, I'll post a video on social, and people are like, well, why don't we have better video than this? Well, if you know anything about photography, specifically wildlife photography, these people are working with a 200 plus millimeter lens, which is a pretty long lens. They're dealing with, a lot of those lenses too. I mean, the ones that they're actually using when you're talking about a nature documentary or something like that, you're talking about sticking people out in the field with 20 grand worth of equipment for years at a time to get this one shot of an Arctic fox or whatever the heck it is. Whereas, most of the Bigfoot videos we have were shot on a cell phone by some random person that wasn't expecting to see anything. And that's why we don't have that many great videos of this. It's a constant is, well, why don't we have a video? We have such better, equipment these days than when the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot. Well, not exactly. And then it's, what lens do you have? I mean, most cell phones have super wide lenses that are equivalent to somewhere around a 24 millimeter lens, which is, super wide. And when you start zooming in on something like that, it doesn't matter if you have a 4K resolution cell phone. It's still, you zoom in far enough, it's going to get pixelated, it's going to get grainy. So unless we have people out there for long periods of time with the proper equipment, you're not going to get the footage you want. A lot of these shows, they're out there for what, 3 weeks at the most, if you're lucky. The show will be out there for 3 weeks. You're not going to get anything in 3 weeks. You need to be out there for a long, long period of time. And then they're carrying a GoPro or a little handheld camcorder or something like that. It's just, you're not going to get that close up, highly detailed shot you want without the right equipment. So Hopefully we'll get that. We're certainly getting more people out there with better gear looking for this stuff, and it's certainly becoming more um, um, viable financially for people to have the right equipment to do this. And there's a lot of stabilizers and that kind of stuff coming out, which will help with the shaky footage, both internal stabilization as well as, physical stabilizers for the cameras. But
Right.
It's going to take someone being in the right place at the right time with the right gear to really get some really nice shots of these creatures. And even then, people will still be arguing about
Oh yeah.
whether that's what Bigfoot looks like or not. And it's
Yeah.
funny how sometimes you'll talk to someone and they'll be like, it's not what anyone says they look like. Just like in that report I posted the other day, she says it's not what people typically say they look like, because there's a lot of different types.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting in that report where she was talking about how skinny it was.
Yeah.
And it just was like it was not what most of the times you hear that it's you either going to hear it's like lean, like a basketball player, very toned, with a V shape to the upper body, or you're going to hear that it was barrel chested and like 4 foot wide shoulders, and it was just unbelievably, it didn't look feasible, the dimensions of it, how big it was.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting to hear that, and how it sounded like it was malnourished.
Right. I mean, and there has to be some that have injuries or diseases or whatever the case may be that prevents them from hunting the way they should, or maybe they're old. There's all kinds of factors, just like with human populations, that come into play that could affect how these things look. So,
Oh sure.
I mean, I've heard, the gamut of looks. Some are tall and skinny, like basketball. We all hear that. Some are, anybody that's looking into this, some are tall and skinny. Some look like bodybuilders. What's the truth? All of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your guys' favorite? What do you think's the best Bigfoot video out there? What do you think? Yeah, I mean, let's take Patterson Gimlin out off the table, since that's everybody's favorite. But I mean, other than that, what do you think is the most compelling video out there?
I think what is that called? The New Year's Eve footage? Is that the one where the Sasquatch stands up and it's got a baby?
Oh,
and it kind of walks off to the
Independence
left.
Day.
Independence Day. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the top on my list, I would say.
I think that's probably the one that I feel the most convincing. That's less. I mean, there's quite a few of them out there, but a lot of them are just like the latest one with the Salt Fork footage or whatever these guys. I'm not sure about that. That one to me, it looks like it could just be a guy in a suit. It doesn't look proportioned right. I mean, there again, though, I mean, who knows, but it looks a little questionable.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely best case scenario, right?
Right.
For getting a lot of footage, and it's hard, you don't want to call people liars. And who knows, with the Independence Day footage, I said I come from a production background, so when I look at that, I think that's especially with the baby aspect of the whole thing, that is not it's not a cheap thing to reproduce. I'm actually have 2 suits right now being commissioned by a professional effects artist, just to study what it would take to hoax things like this, and
Right.
it's very expensive and it's very difficult. And when you start bringing in juvenile infants like that or whatever, I mean, you're getting even more complicated. And that video is never, I mean, it's completely anonymous. So someone did all that just to sit at home for the last,
Yeah.
10 plus years and laugh at us. We fooled all these people with this video. I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
it just seems unlikely.
yeah, I mean, it kind of goes along with the Patterson Gimlin. Why would you, if you're going to go through to make that a hoax, why would you put breast on it, be a female hoax? I mean, that just adds a layer that, why would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come across as sexist, but do you think that probably a lot of people hoaxing this stuff, if they are hoaxing, are guys, So most
Yeah.
guys aren't going to think to put breasts on it. Most guys are going to think to put a baby in its arms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the best. I also like the Russian leaping almasty or yeti. I've heard it called both.
Yeah.
But that one's just, I mean, the physicality.
It's kind of scary. I mean, it's really a scary video.
I mean, that's an amazing. Its ability. It's just jumping around and all over the place. I try to think about, and people say, "Oh, I'm coming back to the production background." People try to say that's CGI. I'm like, you have no concept of CGI if you think that's CGI. I mean, if you're talking about the top companies producing CGI today, you're talking about like ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, who does, all the Marvel movies and this kind of stuff. And look how fake the Hulk looks.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's probably the best people I think are doing that kind of stuff is Neil Blomkamp, who he's done a lot of big movies of his own. I'm trying to remember some of the titles right now. I tend to remember his original short film titles. One called Alive in Joburg, which they made into. I'll tell you. But he does a combination. He'll put a person in a suit and then add a little green screen here and there, and that really sells it. But even so, I mean, even if you're doing something like that with that particular Leaping Almasty video, there's so much brush and stuff in the foreground, and it's so shaky that you're talking about, oh my gosh, so much work. And I don't think that just your average Joe hanging out in Siberia is going to be doing that level of work. And even if they could, it's unlikely that it's going to look that good.
Yeah, and then also, the video is kind of a grainy video.
Oh yeah,
somewhat. It's not crystal clear. So if you're going to go through that, why would you, not make it look perfect?
Yeah, make it real clean. And just mixing it in, just making, so Neil Blomkamp did District 9, Chappie, Elysium, those kind of movies. Really good. Really good CG. But, I mean, it's shaky. You've got a motion track every shake. You either have to fix your CG model of the creature and motion track it to fit the camera shake, or you've got to add that camera shake after the fact. And you're just looking, and then the CG model's got to be perfectly blended into that graininess of the overall video, or it has to be, it's got to be a grain overlay over the whole thing, and it's just not what it looks like. It looks very legit in terms of that being an in-camera effect, if you will, like something practical. And then, so if it's something practical and it's hoaxed, how is it moving like that? And how is it that big moving like that? Because even at the far distance it is away, you can see the muscles in the shoulders and how broad it is. And it's still, I mean, I just don't see a guy in a suit being able to leap around like that.
There's no way. I mean, and that's what when I see it, I mean, that's what it's a scary video to me. It's terrifying to think that there's something that big that is moving like that,
But I mean, that's exactly what people describe, right?
Right.
That it's they can't believe that something that big could move that athletically. If you're in a Batman comics, that's something they talk about in the Nightfall series about Bane, that he's this huge guy that's super athletic. That's what I think about when I see that, except for that's still way bigger than Bane was in the Nightfall comics. It's that's, to me, that's just because of the physicality of that creature. It's probably the most compelling video out there, even more in my opinion than Passion Gimlin, because I can still see is I can't see it due to the time frame. But even if you were saying that film was made now, which obviously it wasn't, even if you're saying that, it would be difficult to obviously match the musculature and everything you see in Patty. But it's still just walking down a creek.
Right.
But if you take the Leaping Almasty, I mean, that's just wild movement, and it's definitely not CG. So, and that's a good one. I really like that one. Yeah.
Now, what about just say out of all the encounters you've heard, what would you say is your favorite, or maybe we'll start with your favorite.
Oh, favorite encounter. I don't know. It's hard to say. They all have their own. They all have their own interesting aspects to them. You know, everything has its little pieces that are interesting. I heard one the other day. I'll be posting on the blog soon. It was just three guys. One was a spotting. They were all elk hunting, I think in Wyoming. And one's a spotter, and the other two guys are going to chase some elk. They drive their truck down the canyon. They're going to there's a small herd of elk down in this canyon, and they're going to go try to get to them. And this guy's just sitting there spotting and for them. And as he's spotting, he notices the elk get spooked. They run up like a 45-degree angle up a hill. And it's well before his buddies had gotten there, so he's not sure what spooked him. And as his buddies finally get to the spot where the elk were at one point, he notices this large figure just off, just beyond them up the hillside, watching them, sort of pacing them as they walk around the area and then head back to the truck because the elk are gone. And he said one of the guys was 6'6", 300 pounds, something like that. And this creature was much larger than them, even being further behind them and up the hill. So if you know about force perspective, that creature should look much smaller if it was anything close to human size than the 6'6" guy.
Right.
It actually still looked, even being a distance behind them, still looked much larger than he was. So, and then, he says that he got the feeling, even being a far distance away, looking at this whole situation through a spotting scope, he got the feeling that the creature knew that he was watching it, which is interesting. You don't want to get too much into I don't want to get too much into the woo aspect of this whole thing, but as they call it. But if we're dealing with creatures with much larger heads and potentially much larger brain casings and thus much larger brains, and we're dealing with creatures that have evolved and adapted differently to humans without the crutch of technology and civilization, have they developed some form of telepathy? Have they developed some form of whatever you want to call that? We know the CIA has studied telepathy in humans.
Right.
So if there's some precedent for it existing in humans, at least in some limited sense, could these creatures have developed that? Could those parts of their brains developed in a way? I mean, you don't want to get too far. I try to stay in the stuff I post, keeping it pretty down to earth, if you will. But is that far of a stretch, really? If we're talking about creatures that have evolved and adapted differently than us, that maybe they have exploited that in their evolution for whatever purpose they needed it for. So you hear those kind of stories where things get a little bit beyond sort of the basics, if you will, the sort of down to earth aspects of these creatures just being
right. It appears in some of these cases it goes beyond flesh and blood.
Yeah, certainly.
It's hard to wrap your head around that, but who knows? I mean, we don't know for a fact as far as that they exist. I mean,
right.
I believe they do because there's there's too many accounts and there's too many encounters that happen. I think it's kind of silly not to believe that there's something to this phenomena. But you know, who knows? But I mean, you've got to do something with people who claim to see these things do stuff that is beyond explanation. You know?
Yeah, the cloaking thing is that whole next level, and the cloaking, it's like, are they actually disappearing? Are they actually camouflaging themselves? Is it just that as a natural animal living in the woods that they do blend in more with their environment, or does these potential telepathic abilities allow them to mess with our minds? So they're not actually disappearing, but they're messing with what we can see.
Right.
So, I mean, there's all kinds of places you could take that.
Yeah.
It's, but like I said, I try to keep it a little more down to earth and social, at least for now, because I have people arguing with me enough just in regards to the existence of this. So you don't want to take it there, because people can barely wrap their heads around the idea that, it's not just one, up in the Pacific Northwest somewhere hanging out in the pot fields.
Yeah.
Everybody just wants to, it's a very limited mindset, or people think they know everything about it, and the truth is we don't know much, and it's most likely a much bigger phenomenon than any of us have wrapped our heads around. And so, I like to think about the idea too that there's we're some hominid species that may have evolved autonomously of everything that came out of Africa, and may have evolved here in the Americas somewhere, and we may be dealing with something like that as well. So some sort of New World ape or monkey that evolved into something larger. So who knows? I mean, we really don't, but it's certainly a great thought experiment. I mean, that's certainly how I approach it. If nothing else, we're working on our critical thinking skills here, and trying to have a better understanding about human development and how we got here in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Obviously, people are seeing something, and you have to do. I mean, and who was it we talked to? I believe it was that guy Glenn down at Lake Marion. He had a good comment. He says, if thousands and thousands of people have encounters, all we need is one of them to be true. I mean, if you look at it that way, that puts a whole different light on it. I mean, you can sit here and say, oh, well, these people are hoaxing. That it doesn't matter if they're hoaxing. If one of them is right and they saw what they said they saw, then we've got something going on here.
Oh yeah, I've made 412 posts on the Instagram, and that's a mix of photographic evidence, tracks, and news reports.
Yeah.
What if even one piece of those 412 posts, if just one, is based in reality, then the whole phenomenon is legitimized.
Yep.
So, it's huge. And some of these go back, thousands of years to some extent, hundreds of years. I'm reading a book right now called Myths of the Cherokee from 1880. It's got some great stories, and some of them, were told in 1880, but they're like, the story is, from the first Cherokee people ever, So, this phenomenon goes back a very, very long time. Obviously, probably before we were even here. Homo sapiens. So, people talk about it's some sort of psychological contagion. It's a ancestral DNA memory or whatever you want to call it, but that doesn't leave footprints or hair samples or, eat your dog, whatever the case may be. So, it's pretty good stuff. I think we're onto something. I think there's enough cameras out there that we'll know more about this soon enough. The Navy just came out and basically disclosed the reality of the UFO phenomenon now. Whether it's back in September, they came out and said that, the whole discussing the whole Tic Tac incident, and all that. And, if that's coming to light, then Bigfoot should be right behind it, I would say.
But speaking of that, what is your thought? I know we're kind of staying with like Bigfoot or Sasquatch in this country, but what is your thoughts on these people that or what is your thought on the government knowing about these creatures and covering up?
Well, for at least since 1947, if not before, with the Aztec incident, then there's certainly a precedent that they could be covering this up, and there's certainly cases, like with the Mount St. Helens explosion in the '80, and some other incidents, where even if you just go back to Missing 411 and Dennis Martin, where the military and the FBI showed up to look for this kid. Something they don't talk about in a lot of those cases, but Paulides talks about in his book, is that a large, hairy creature was seen around that same time in the area, and it certainly makes you think that maybe maybe they are covering this up. Maybe they know about it. Now the question is why. Why are they covering it up? What would be the point of it covering up? There's theories that the whole national park system were created as basically like a reservation for these creatures. I don't know. What do you guys think about why they would be covering it up if they are?
I think, a couple reasons. Primarily, I think that it would change people's thoughts and people's willingness to go. Well, I think it had basically two effects. I think some people who are big, huge outdoorsy people and want to be out in the woods, I think a lot of them would quit going out, especially with kids and stuff, camping, if they knew something like this existed was legitimate and was proven. And I believe, on the other hand, you would have people just flooding in, wanting to be trying to find these creatures and interact if they actually knew they were real. Kind of, and I think it would be, that would be bad as far as if these people actually encounter these creatures. It could possibly be not a good encounter. Yeah. But I think, it's got a little bit of a financial aspect as far as for the park systems and for just the outdoor business in general. And I think, I don't know, just the fact that the government's covering something up and they're not sharing the information.
Right.
But I mean, I've heard these stories about people claiming to be on kill squads and stuff in the military that went out and hunted these creatures. So, I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Specifically, or heard?
No, this is just stuff I've heard on other, on other podcasts.
Yeah, I think Sasquatch Chronicles had one about some guys that were out. I know there was one where they were out like busting pot fields, and they came across like a family. That was an interesting story.
Yeah.
And certainly others I've heard flying around helicopters and shooting these things, taking the bodies.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? They certainly could, and you would imagine, there's the stories of, during the Cold War, of the Soviets working on, an army of ape men and all this, trying to hybridize humans and apes for a super soldier and all that kind of stuff. So certainly it could be, would be something that our military would, and Black Ops would certainly be interested in as well, I would imagine. And as far as I think you're absolutely right as far as the financial and other aspects. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, we'll find DNA, and people say, oh, it's human. Well, do we have the markers to differentiate? I mean, if chimps are 98.6 or whatever, 99% human, basically, as far as DNA is concerned, but that tiny percentage can make them that much different, then, and we're talking about something that's even more human than that, how would we even be able to differentiate the DNA from human DNA? We would need very specific markers to show that. So if we're dealing with something that is pretty much human, probably 99.9% possibly human DNA, or somewhere in that range, between us and chimpanzees, then there's going to be a lot of human rights issues with protecting their environment and that kind of thing, which that's obviously a big theory, is logging industry, oil industry, and all those different just property development in general,
Right.
Would be affected.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would affect every state in the continental. I mean, the contiguous states.
Right.
And I think a lot of people miss that. I've had discussions with people, at work and even within the family, because everybody knows that we do this podcast. I'm in this subject, very interested in it. And, that question is brought up. Well, they're only up in the Pacific Northwest, or only a few spots. And I was like, no, you don't understand. There's been encounters in every state in the lower 48, that there have been encounters. They're not isolated to just certain areas. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, that when they even consider this, oh, well, yeah, I guess it could exist up in the Pacific Northwest because that's a vast area of wilderness. But I think it's obviously broader than that.
Well, there's plenty of wilderness all over the country.
Right.
I was talking to a guy the other day that had a sighting in Tennessee, and he said it was a big piece of property that they were on that then backed up to like a 10,000 acre tract of additional land that then backed up to a national forest. So, I mean, and then that happened to be, and when we get into the cave issue and the cave theory, is that it was also like a hot spot for spelunking. So there's obviously a lot of caves there. So, I mean, yeah, there's plenty of environment all over the country. And, we're in South Carolina. I have a video on Instagram. It's from Tigerville. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's in upstate SC, right on the border almost of North Carolina, and very close to some national forest area. And this creature is, I mean, I drop it into my editing system to look at it frame by frame on a big screen. When you look at it on Instagram, it's obviously a much smaller image, but if you look at that video, I mean, especially frame by frame, you can see that this thing if it's a guy in a suit, he's carrying a very large buck on his back that has a big wound in its neck. Big obvious red wound. I mean, it looks like a bite was taken out of the neck, but you can't really, I mean, it's too pixelated to tell exactly what the wound was, but it looks like a bite was taken out of the neck of this thing. So this guy's tromping through the woods. It's obviously not like even ground or, a trail or anything like that. So if it's a hoax, he's tromping through the woods in a suit, which if anybody's ever put, one of these big masks on, it's not necessarily always level with your eyes. You can't necessarily see out of these things all that well. And then he's carrying this big buck on his back. So, and it was from a YouTube page that has almost no followers. I think the video had like maybe 20 views or something like that. So the person who posted it, who I haven't been able to get in touch with, got nothing out of it. So what's the point, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's some big guys that carry a 300-pound buck on their back, but then walking, throw a barbell with 300 pounds on your back and walk casually through the woods. In a
Right.
Bigfoot suit. go ahead and try to do that and see how it works out for you. I
Yeah.
would love to see it happen. And then you go frame by frame, and something you hear in a lot of cases are, that these things are almost jittery like a crackhead or something. And that's, I mean, if you're going frame by frame, and I'm, this video I think was like 29 frames per second. It's moving its head really fast. It's almost within one frame. It's like jerking its head around and back. It's not like slowly looking back or anything like that. There's a lot of jerky movements that you see, like it's which would make sense to a certain extent. They say that ADD in humans is sort of a holdover from when we were hunters and gatherers and had to be super aware of our environment and everything that's going on. So you can imagine these kind of creatures, in some cases at least, being very, jittery like that. So it's a very interesting look if you want to go in there and check it out.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I
It's
haven't seen that.
it's reddish hair. It's definitely got a conical head, long arms, and like light grayish skin. And I heard an account the other day from a guy in Marietta, which is South Carolina. So if you look at Marietta and Tigerville, they're almost parallel. Tigerville is just north of Marietta. And there's definitely some whoops going on, and they're not from the same. They don't seem to be from the same direction of this creature. So there's probably other creatures in the area. It's, people don't like that turkey hunter video, but it's somewhat similar where you see that. I mean, I think this creature looks more Bigfoot-like than those, but it's you see one of those things just carrying a deer across its back. And I think people underestimate the difficulty of just carrying a big fresh kill across your back, something that hasn't even been gutted yet or anything like that, or drained. That's a lot of weight.
Oh yeah.
Just be strolling through the woods with, especially in a suit of some sort.
Right.
Yeah, so definitely check out that Tigerville video and let me know what you think, because it's an interesting one, and one that I haven't seen anywhere else really, other than that one little YouTube page, which basically just has that video and some guys shooting guns here and there. It just looks like some regular guys that grabbed that video at some point. The dogs are going nuts, and there's whoop sounds, and
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I'll definitely check that one out. That area up there, that's where I've heard one of the most crazy stories. I guess encounter, or it was more actually than an encounter. I can't remember where I heard it. It might have been on Sasquatch Chronicles, or I'm not sure. But this guy had somehow he befriended this woman, and this woman, I can't remember how the story went. I think he was at this area and he had run into this woman to talk to her, and he had gone back to her house sometime later, I believe it was, and while he was talking to her, he heard like all this commotion upstairs in her house. And while he was, talking to her, he's like, "What's all that commotion?" And like two juveniles came down the steps. And basically this woman was like a grandmother kind of figure to him, and she babysat these supposedly these baby big feet while parents were out hunting, I guess, or something. And yeah, it was I wish I could remember where I heard that, but it was the craziest thing I've ever heard. But she interacted with them. It was like a habituation site. They came back to her house, they've dropped off their kids, she interacted with them, and would like, the big male would come and would stand off in the background, and it was crazy. But it was that area of the state.
Really? Yeah, you hear a lot of that all over. You hear about older women who are widows or whatever the case may be, living out, in the forest, or living out on the edge of the town or whatever the case may be, with habituation situations going on.
Yep.
And it's very interesting. I don't know if you heard the one about was this one? I feel like this one might have been, no, this one was in like Mississippi or something, but there was one on Sasquatch Chronicles about this lady feeding, like she was catching animals in like traps that like animal control would bring you to like catch feral cats or whatever.
Yeah.
And feeding them to these creatures that were coming up to her house.
Yeah, that was the guy that said he watched the one come around like with doing the spider crawl.
Oh, the spider crawl thing is so creepy.
Yeah.
What is that? That's a whole nother aspect of this, that some of these things are spider crawling like that, And I mean, I often say that they're like, these things are basically raised like a Navy SEAL or a Marine recon or
Oh, sure.
something like that. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of where that would come from, but yikes.
Wasn't there just it might have been on Sasquatch Chronicles too, where the lady just recently was on there, had seen one in Washington State where she come around the corner, like around a bend, and there was one in the like the opposite lane, and it was doing the spider crawl. She said she didn't know what it was. She just kept seeing things go up and down, and she thought it was I think she said she thought it was a bear, and then she realized it stood up on two legs, but she said it was like I can't remember how she said there was all this movement, and I guess it was like its joints or something, its arms and legs coming up or something, I don't know, but it was basically, it sounded like she said it was on its toes and on his fingers, doing the spider crawl in the middle of the road.
Yeah, that stuff's crazy, but as again, I think we have to think about that we're looking at remnants of the progression of bipedal locomotion or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of these relic populations are old, species. This human bipedalism didn't just pop out of nowhere. There was a progression of this over time amongst various species, and it obviously wasn't always we weren't always just strolling around on 2 feet. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting thing to think about. And is that environmental adaptation or something, whatever, genetics, or is it just how a certain type of older early hominid moved, and what was the adaptation for that? Does that have something to do with them living in cave systems, and moving through cave systems?
Sure.
Adapted to that. So it's certainly a spider crawl is certainly a creepy aspect. What have you guys heard, since you're based in the South, and I think you guys have been interviewing people longer than I have? I've heard people say that the old timers will call them catamounts, or I've heard a lot of people say that they thought they moved cat-like on all fours. You heard anything like that?
No, I haven't heard them called that, specifically referred to in that way, but I mean, I've heard, not necessarily in this area, but there's been a lot of encounters that not necessarily people we've talked to, but we did when we talked to Mike Richburg. He talked about seeing him down in the Sparkleberry Swamp, and when he ran up on a couple of them, and they ran out on all fours and then transitioned to 2 feet, and then what he described was, they were. I think I described it as, he was saying they went through the trees, grabbing trees, and so it's like walking through the trees. I mean, I've heard that in other accounts where people said that they when they hit like say they were in a clearing and they transitioned to like a tree line, that they would walk with their arms through the trees, which, you see monkeys do that. You see monkeys where they support themselves just strictly off their arms. Mm-hmm. And they, to escape or to get away from whatever they're trying to get away from.
Right. And that would make sense as to why we see them with the longer arms quite often. They're described to having almost longer arms than their legs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
longer arms and very defined shoulder muscles. I mean, how many times I've heard people say their deltoids were like basketballs.
Right. Yeah. 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 And you see that kind of in that Yeti Almasty leaking video we were
Right.
talking about earlier. Is he kind of does that a little bit. You can't
Yep.
see it all the time because he's obscured by the brush and the trees, but there's definitely moments where he looks like he kind of pushed off of some trees and goes flying several feet. Yeah, they're it's interesting. Have you guys ever seen anything yourself, or just I haven't? So I
No,
want to.
no,
No.
we haven't.
Yeah. Do you guys do much field work, or mostly just collecting stories and research?
Yeah, no, we don't. We pretty much are armchair.
Yeah.
But we have gone up to we did go up to Uwari. I've been up there twice, and I think together we went up there once. And the first time I went to Uwari, I stopped there on the way home from North Carolina, from the Raleigh area. Was where my company has a place up there. And I came through and I said, well, I'm just going to detour, go through Troy, North Carolina, and hit Uwari. And I went up to where the Mike Green footage was filmed, the thermal footage,
Mm-hmm.
to the, what's it called, the Ore Cemetery.
Right.
And I pulled in there. And I honestly didn't even get out of my car because I pulled in there and got so creeped out. I got
Really?
such a strong feeling of, like being watched that I was like, yeah, I'm here by myself. I lost my cell phone signal, like 7 miles back. I'm out. And I was like, that I don't want to be a statistic of some kind. I just got, I got a really weird feeling. So I left there, but it was odd because it probably was maybe like a year, 8 months later. Me and my son and one of my brothers went up there on a Saturday. We went to the same area, and that whole stretch right there by the cemetery where all that happened, they had huge signs like posted, "Keep off this property. You can't, like, don't go beyond it." I mean, it was like every 5 feet they had a sign. It was ridiculous.
It was excessive to say the least. For if it was just some the land's flooded or something down here, it just seemed like it was far too much for something minor.
Right. And I mean, the way that land is, I mean, there was no way that could be, the case. I mean, it all rolls off down towards the river anyways.
Yeah.
So no, I mean that we've gone there and we've had plans to do other stuff, but it's just, life's busy, so it's hard to get out.
What time of year were you there?
Let's see. The first time I went, it was warm. I want to say it was in the late spring,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe it might have been over the summer. And when we went, it was
either fall or spring. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't like the heat of summer, because I mean, I remember when we were out there, we hiked up and down a little bit, and we were pretty sweaty, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I think it was spring.
It wasn't July or August.
Yeah, I don't remember the trees weren't turning or anything. So
Right. I've been considering taking a little field trip, if you will, there this year, but I was looking at the BFRO records, and it seems like the majority of their major activity there is between September and November. So I was kind of trying to think about getting there in the fall. I've been looking at North Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina for maybe April or May for a trip, just to it seems like there's some activity, especially in North Georgia.
Oh yeah.
In April and May. So just trying to take a look at when areas near here are most active.
Yeah, it seems like North Georgia's a very active area. And I've heard quite a bit coming from Uwari. In the past year or so, I've heard more stories than I've ever heard. Not necessarily people we've talked to, just, hearing it through other podcasts and other places, reading about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a drone with a zoom lens on it, so I'm feeling like if I can at least identify where some vocalizations or something are coming from, if you're lucky enough to experience that, I could at least put the drone up, if it's not geofenced in the area, and send it out and try to get a closer look at whatever's going on.
Yeah.
But you got to get it pretty closer. It's no one's gonna
Yeah.
put it anyway.
Well, yeah.
But hopefully the zoom lens would help with that. So yeah, it's a tough subject to tackle, I think.
Oh yeah.
But hopefully we're getting a little bit closer with technology to being able to find some more definitive evidence. The question is, do we want to? Is that is that good or bad? I guess for this phenomenon, for whatever creatures are out there. What do you guys think? Is proving it a good thing, or I mean, like you said, people might go out and harm them, or
yeah, but I mean, in
get harmed.
reality, they've survived this long without, for the most part, without being harmed or.
Right.
I mean, they're the masters of their domain, and I don't
sure.
think anybody's going to touch them. I mean, I think I would love for them to be proven real
Mm-hmm.
in one regard, but then in another, it's like, the hunt for it and the research behind it is thrilling too. So
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Not that necessarily that would all go away
Right.
if they were proven real, because obviously they're still gonna be elusive.
Right.
But I think for the species, it might be. Well, I don't know. I'll say it could be a good thing. It could be detrimental. So
Yeah, at least we get mainstream science actually doing some legit field study on the subject if there was better evidence brought to the table. Though if there is, is it going to get covered up one way or the other? What are your thoughts? Have you guys looked into the early newspaper accounts of giant skeletons and that kind of thing in the U.S. and obviously the reported Smithsonian cover up?
Yeah, I was actually just getting ready to mention that,
Yeah.
because I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard that supposedly the Smithsonian had a skeleton, and it's disappeared or whatever's locked up in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of newspaper accounts of that, and they all, not all, but a large number bring up, oh, the Smithsonian said, hey, send us the bones. We'll put them in the museum, and then they're never heard from again. So that's certainly an interesting aspect of this whole potential cover up is the Smithsonian and what their motivations were, where are the bones,
it's kind of crazy to think that somewhere in the bowels of the Smithsonian there could be a skeleton, and it would blow the cover off of all this, but
right.
it makes you wonder what the motivation is.
Right, it does. It's a big subject, and to think that it's just a couple of hillbillies running around in a homemade suit or with wood, stamps on their feet or whatever the case may be is just silly at best.
Yeah, definitely. I think those times have gone, and I think even though some of the shows that have come out in the recent years on the subject have been rather cheesy, I think it has brought the subject to the mainstream, and
Right.
it's not, as in a lot of subjects, it's not it's easier to talk about it and have a discussion about it without people just rolling their eyes and thinking you're nuts. I mean, just it goes right along with the whole UFO disclosure and that subject, you know.
Right.
It's
Yeah. It's a lot's coming to light, I think, and we're sort of in that. It's an exciting time to be alive, for
Yep.
those reasons that a lot of this stuff is coming out. But there's an ancient Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." So I think
Yeah.
it's a little bit of both. So we'll see. There's certainly a potential benefit to humanity to proving this. If you just consider the biomedical field, I mean, what could we learn from um, these creatures, genetics, and how they survive and exist, and the benefits that studying their biology could be for us, and maybe vice versa. But
Sure.
who probably in the end may not be so good for them. Though you're right, they're an apex animal. They're apex predator. Most likely, they're the top of their food chain wherever they are. But they're probably hiding from us for a reason too.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I think that they are an intelligent creature, and I think across the board, not just for the Sasquatch, but for all of these unexplained. I think that they're smart enough to know what man has done, that we have a tendency to really screw things up when we touch it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would hope that it wouldn't happen with if this creature was proven. But unfortunately, I think they would find a way to make it not good for them in some form or fashion.
Yeah, that tends to be what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to post regularly about just in the story of our IG about different conservation efforts with primates that we know exist, gorillas, mountain gorillas, orangutans, and those and the like, just to remind people that wow, this is an interesting subject. There are known primates out there that we did bad things to in the past, and we need to work towards uh, helping survive now. And
Yeah.
hopefully that would be the ultimate goal, I think, of discovery would be to, is it a financial burden? Most likely on, but, to preserve more areas for these things to exist in. Because, I mean, I think we are having more encounters. I see the meme about haven't seen Bigfoot in a while. Hope he's okay. Well, if you're
Yeah.
following this subject, that's completely untrue. There's a
Yeah.
lot more sightings being reported than ever before. So, and I think that's because we're encroaching on their
Yeah.
environment. And so hopefully we can, if it is discovered or proven to be true, we can prevent that to some extent.
Yeah. I think it's a combination of man encroaching on their environment, as well as it's gotten to a point where a lot of people who were afraid to come forward and just tell their encounter, what happened or what they saw, feel more comfortable with the subject matter now,
Sure.
because it has become it's a lot more in the mainstream, and with TV shows and stuff, is like I said, as cheesy as some of them are, has really opened the door on it.
Yeah, I get asked a lot what I think about some of those shows. Just try to keep that to myself. But there are definitely some that don't necessarily put the best look on it, but at least it's getting it out there to the broader public. There was
Yeah.
one that came out, and there was only one episode of it, so I don't know if they're doing any more. If that was a pilot or whatever. But Ancient Monster Quest that came on History Channel recently. I thought was pretty good. It at least kind of, instead of a bunch of people running around in the woods hollering, it was, more of a historical look at the subject. And, I think, show people that this is a very old subject that is worldwide and goes back forever.
Oh, yeah.
And that sort of takes people away from thinking that it's just, a modern hoax.
Right. I have to check that out. I didn't know that came out.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure when it's going to air again, but if you have access to the History Channel app, it's on there. You can play it on there. It was pretty good. Had Kathy Strain on there, who's of course an interesting researcher of this, and some other interesting account stories I hadn't heard before. And just a general look at it, all the way back to, they talk about I think I posted part of it, but there was a recent, I think it was like a Tibetan scroll that had Yetis, or maybe it was a tapestry that was found that had Yetis on it eating people.
Oh, wow.
Which was, they're like ripping one person apart, and another one's like got like half a person in its mouth.
Wow.
And I definitely posted a piece of that on the IG, but definitely interesting stuff coming out, and more about these guys not necessarily all being friendly forest dwellers that are vegan, like the Harry and the Hendersons storyline, but
I think they're opportunistic eaters, just like most wild animals. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stories of them, just kind of like slapping deer and wild hogs and like stunning them, and then just kind of snapping their necks. So, I mean, any large animal like that's gonna, people, even they get into how, like, originally chimpanzees were thought to be vegetarian or vegan, and how, they later found that they would kill and eat smaller monkeys and other animals, and we're definitely meat eaters as well, just opportunist omnivores. And I think any sort of large primate like that is going to need to be at some point. I mean, I know gorillas are vegetarian, but that, may just be a regional adaptation that may not be applicable in all areas for large primates. So, and if they're anywhere close to human, they're most likely omnivores.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, obviously. I mean, it makes you wonder, though. I mean, could they be the creature that they are if they weren't? So,
right. Probably not. I think it's interesting when you hear stories, especially in the Pacific Northwest, of them like fishing out kelp and stuff like that. To eat, possibly using it for medicinal purposes. I mean, even Native American First Nations tribes up there will talk about that. In some cases, they even taught them to use kelp and that kind of thing for medicinal purposes, and would trade with them for different things. So, and you could certainly imagine, at least if you're talking about the Pacific Northwest, where they have tons of kelp and salmon and that kind of thing, but they would certainly have healthy brains eating like that. Those are things they tell us to eat now for brain health.
Yeah.
Humans. It's very interesting stuff.
Definitely interesting subject, and I think we're just starting to really brush the surface of it. I mean, with with technology advancing the way it is, and the subject matter coming out and being more information readily available and people willing to talk about it.
Yeah, one of the new things I've seen on the most recent shows is environmental DNA being taken, which is certainly an interesting development in this technology that could help us find that kind of stuff. So you just find like a nest or something, and you could potentially pull DNA just from the dirt or nest material.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, I read about that a couple weeks ago, and I didn't know that existed. I didn't know you could do that. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, the technology's coming. We're gonna prove this soon enough. Again, and I think with the DNA thing, it's going to be more about even being able to identify the markers within the DNA. They're going to show that this is something other than human, but extremely close to it. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to do that because I'm not a geneticist. But
Right.
But when we get there, that will certainly. You're still not going to be able to identify whether it's human or something very close to human. So hopefully all that will develop, and if we have DNA, that's pretty much all we need. But we are finding a lot more well preserved, and I think as ice starts melting around the world for one reason or another, in different places, we're going to find more of these sort of mummified or like frozen specimens that we'll be able to pull better DNA from of early humans, and then possibly have some of those markers to look for. But even then, they came out recently saying that even more humans than they realized have Neanderthal DNA, and we have this Denisovan DNA, and the Denisovans were, we only have a jawbone, but they're saying that those were large humans, or large human-like animals. So, is that something that we're looking at here too? Not just like Gigantopithecus, but some of these other large early humans. But if we have those DNA as human, that DNA as humans, how are we going to identify once again whether what we're looking at is a relict hominid or just another human that sneezed on the sample or whatever the case may be. So it's going to be hard to convince until we move this whole science thing a lot further down the road.
Oh yeah.
But be fun to watch over the next couple of decades, I imagine.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think ultimately, there's going to have to be. I think no matter what comes out, if there's not a actual specimen, people are going to have a question of. There's still going to be questions, and there's still going to be people who don't, believe whatever information you put in front of them. So,
yeah,
unfortunately,
right. Well, I mean, what do you think it would take to get a specimen? I mean, what are we looking at, like a 50 caliber Barrett sniper rifle or something to take one of these things down? I don't really, and within the ethical ramifications of that, I don't even know. Most guys will have like, most hunters will say, I had a pretty serious rifle on me and 30-06 or something, and I still didn't think it would.
Yeah.
Do the job. I was afraid to shoot it because it would probably take me out before it went down. So who knows?
And that was something I was going to say when you mentioned that, because people that have claimed to have shot one, there's been accounts where people said they have shot them multiple times and it had appeared to have no effect on them.
Right.
So I mean, what do you do with that?
Right. What do you do? Yeah, I mean, is that one of these more like out there things where it's like interdimensional and it's not even hitting them? If it's some sort of, is it just that it's so, the Native Americans talk about that it had really tough skin and like arrows wouldn't penetrate it, but modern rifle is a lot,
oh yeah,
a lot more powerful than a bow and arrow.
Yeah, and you can't really say that's like an adrenaline hit, like you see with like a deer or elk or something when they get shot and they just run until they drop. Right. I mean, The cases where I've heard this, they're talking about it just the creature's not reacting, basically.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I mean, but then you have people that claim they've been on these kill teams for the government and they've
Right.
taken them out. So obviously there's something can take them out. So
Right. Yeah. And there's the account. What's the blanking right now? But there was the account of the Native Americans that killed the red-haired giants in the cave out west somewhere.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So there are accounts of Native Americans taking these guys out for taking too many of their women or eating too many of their kids or whatever the case may have been. But it typically wasn't shooting them. They had to like burn them and then shoot them a bunch of times, and spears
Yeah.
and everything else. So it's definitely a mix of stories involving these creatures. And I mean, there's Linda Moulton Howe talks about the case where a guy tried to shoot one and it disappeared in a flash of light.
Oh
what
yeah.
the heck is that? So
Wasn't there a case? It might be the same case, but I thought it was a woman who opened the door, like she heard something on her front porch or something. It was like late at night. She opened her door, and this thing was standing there, and she had a shotgun, and she went to shoot it, and it did the same thing. It was like a flash of light, and it was gone.
Yeah, I think there's multiple cases in that, with that storyline. So, I mean, a flash of light. And then there's and then getting into the UFO phenomenon, there's the whole thought of seeing them come out of UFOs. But, with the abduction phenomenon, they could be abducting Bigfoot too, right? And putting him back.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily, a lot of people say, well, that's proof that they're aliens. Well,
Not
not
necessarily.
necessarily. Yeah, there could just be abduction victims as well, and then there's the idea that maybe these things are the original population of this planet and we're just some sort of alien Bigfoot hybrid. And then we're
Littlefoot hybrid.
Yeah, they're really getting down the road. So
Oh yeah.
on the woo side of things. So who knows what the truth is, but fun to think about, right?
What do you think? I mean, if you're just considering the whole subject, what is your thought on the subject? Like, what do you think they are?
Like I said, I'm trying to keep pretty grounded, and so my down to earth thought is that we're just dealing with all those relics of all those, maybe not all of them, but some of those early hominids that have survived to now through adaptation and interbreeding and are now something else than they were. But now, of course, that doesn't explain, like I said, how they disappear in a flash of light or whatever the case may be. But I think we're dealing most likely with some sort of hybridized version of early hominids that have just still lived today. So, and they've interbred with other hominids. They've interbred with, including humans, and and then in those regional variations, we're just looking at both what other hominids were in that region. Like we were talking about. There's obviously non-baboon like sightings in North Carolina, but that one sighting I posted on the blog was something that was very baboon-like. So there's obviously variations all over the place and within the same environment. So you're dealing with early hominids that have interbred with each other and humans in that area, like the Seraphin Long story where she was taken. Now that was on Pacific Northwest, but Canada area, but she was taken and impregnated by one of these creatures. So I think we're dealing with whatever has manifested over time from these early human ancestors to now through hybridization and environmental adaptation. And that's why they're all fairly different, because wherever you are, um, you're seeing some sort of subspecies, subtype of these creatures. And, and then we get these, they're given these colloquial names, these regional names, for, whatever the local people want to call them. And, and that's another, conversation and argument that people have is, about whether they're the same thing or not. Well, we got to get beyond Bigfoot, really.
Right.
This like generic name for all of it. Because people are arguing about, was it Bigfoot or not? Well, yeah, no. I heard a story the other day. It was a secondhand story. But this guy's a fishing guide in this area of the upstate of South Carolina, but he has a friend down in Florida that does the same thing, sort of a bigger operation. They do hunting and all kinds of other stuff. But they said that they drained some marshlands and some wetlands on the property. They own a huge tract of property. When they drained them, there were all these caves that were like underwater caves that were clearly dry, even with water. When there was water there, and within these caves there was tons of bones and all this stuff. So, and it wasn't. These guys would know better than I, but they were saying they clearly wasn't like alligator kills or something like that. So, when you're talking about skunk apes and that kind of thing, are they living in caves under the marsh? Are they taking animals down there and living in these sort of underwater cave systems in Florida, a place where you wouldn't necessarily expect that? So there's, and then that skunk apes are said to kind of have a completely different look than other creatures. I had another guy saying the other day, I don't know, video or photo I posted was, oh, it looks too clean and perfect. Well, if you're not living in a dirty swamp like a skunk ape, you don't necessarily, you might look a little cleaner and coiffed. You actually hear that a lot. I've heard a few accounts where they look, pristine, and you can see some primates groom each other and that kind of thing. Yep. So I've heard, them say they look like, a guy from a hair band in the 80s, perfect, like hair blowing in the wind. And but if you're living, that's an environmental thing, I think, in a lot of cases. If you're a skunk ape swimming around through the swamps all the time, and your hair is probably going to be a little more matted and muddy, and
probably have some stuff growing in it,
Yeah, I commonly think, I don't know, I watched unfortunately it was canceled because it was pretty good, but the whole Swamp Thing comic and the movies back in the 80s and 90s, and then they did a series recently. I tend to think that whole comic book was actually inspired by some of these quote unquote swamp monsters that were most likely these creatures that we're talking about, just covered in muck and seaweed and all this kind of stuff, just intermixed with vegetation and whatnot, just intermixed with their fur, and maybe even giving them more of a green tint. Those kind of stories are probably what inspired that comic, which is obviously a different kind of thing, because it's a plant-based creature, but that was probably what inspired that initially. And just because it was, these are these hominids that are living in the swamp and swimming around in that stuff and covered in it, and so there's a lot of different looks to these things, and we got to keep in mind that they're going to look different in all areas, and based on what they're dealing with, just trying to live, trying to get by. So just like us.
That's kind of, we did a episode on the lizard man of Bishopville, and that's what I think that is. I think that was just a misidentification. I think it was actually a Sasquatch that just had, junk in its hair and it had a greenish tint. I mean, that could be wrong, but there were a lot of sightings of what was described as a Sasquatch type creature around that time frame in that area. So
certainly could be. I think the swamp monster thing is most likely related to this. I think a lot of these sort of stories are related to this in some way. I mean, you could even have one of these things that has mange or something, or
right.
we're just dealing with alopecia or something, like some sort of issue, just like humans do.
Yep.
You can have albino one or whatever the case may be, that you're gonna have genetic variation, and the more inbreeding you have from a small population, you're gonna have even more weird stuff coming up, and physical traits. When you get into how many toes are on a track and all those kinds of arguments, that can all be affected by interbreeding in a population. So, yeah, I think a lot of it. Now, there is an interesting theory, if you want to diverge quickly to the whole lizard man / reptilian thing. There's an interesting theory that was propagated back in the early 80s called the dinosauroid. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but a paleontologist put this forward, that early or late Cretaceous small raptor type dinosaurs who were already bipedal could have not necessarily died because they ate mostly rats and the small small rat type mammals that survived, obviously, whatever killed the larger dinosaurs, the asteroid or whatever it might have been that blocked out the sun or whatever, you want to think did that. There's most likely a variety of factors that came into play.
Right.
But that smaller dinosaur that fed on these small mammal-like rodents that survived that extinction event could have continued to exist, could have survived, could have continued to evolve. They were already showing high levels of intelligence, and could have evolved into something that was more humanoid. And when you see their reconstruction or perspective construction of what this would look like, it looks a lot like what people talk about in terms of reptilians, or even like almost like gray aliens, but just a little more reptilian like. So that's an interesting theory. Obviously it's just a theory that isn't all that popular because not that many people have heard about it, but it was put forth by legitimate scientists. It has been rehashed in the last 20 years several times, just people considering that. And certainly when you think about early indigenous people also have stories of more reptile like people or ant type people or that kind of thing. And if you had something like that that's had 60 million years to continue evolving, what would that be now? If it was still around in some sense, and it could have had time to evolve to a much higher level of technology and everything else, and still, flown away in a UFO or whatever you want to call it, come back, still be here living in wherever, Agartha or whatever you want to talk. I mean, it gets way out there if you want to get crazy, but 60 million years is a long time to evolve and do other things. So we've only been here like 2, I think. So yeah, that's maybe not even that long. Close to humans have been here around 2 million years. So that's a long time to evolve. But I do think that a lot of these swamp monster type creatures that came out between the 50s to the 80s were most likely just misidentified versions of this phenomenon, this Bigfoot phenomenon that we're talking about. They were just covered in crap, from the swamp. So, Mike Richburg, actually, you introduced me to, and you guys have talked to extensively. Right. He looked into that. I guess he had boots on the ground when that actually happened.
Yep.
I was a kid living in Blythewood, South Carolina, around Columbia at the time. So I was pretty close. I remember that whole thing. I remember everybody selling T-shirts.
Oh yeah.
When
Lizard's
that
Thicket
happened.
had them at
Oh yeah,
the Lizard's Thicket restaurant. My brother worked there, and I remember him bringing them home for us and stuff. So
oh yeah. But that
it's
was
kind of an
great.
exciting time.
It was. It was cool. It was cool. I remember I was only like, I was maybe, let's see, what was that, like 89, 88, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's 88. Yeah.
yeah, I was a young kid, but it was definitely an exciting time. I mean, especially I was already into this stuff then, so it was pretty cool. Um, I actually have a video. I don't know if y'all had it where you were, but there was a show called the Mr. Knows It Show.
Oh
He
yeah.
was a
Yep.
weatherman, and I was actually, he would have, like, he play cartoons, and then he had a bunch of kids on the show, and I was actually on that when I was like 5.
Oh, cool.
And they're going through the kids, and they're like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And it's fireman, policeman, teacher, fireman, policeman, teacher, fireman. They get to Trey, and and I'm like, "I want to be a paleontologist." It's like complete what. So I was into this stuff at a very young age. And then, I started seeing, like, In Search Of and Syndication and whatnot in the early 80s. And that sort of got me on the path of Nessie and Bigfoot, these other type things. But I haven't really, while I've been researching this since, for a very long time. My dad is actually a pretty well-known minister in South Carolina and in the Southeast. So I hadn't really put my research out publicly until just
Right.
recently when he retired, because it's, like you said, for a long time there's a lot of pushback on any of this stuff, and especially in religious communities and that kind of thing. So it's good to be able to talk to people more about it now and sort of put the stuff out there, because I think the more people like you and I and you guys and others that are interested in this just put it out there, it's certainly, like you said, is bringing it more into the mainstream and making people feel a little more comfortable about talking about it. One of the recent stories I got was from a friend of a friend of a friend who, they were telling about what I was doing on social media, and they said that they were skeptical and blah blah blah, and even though they had had an encounter, just skeptical of my motivations, and then went and looked at what we've been doing on social, and okay, this looks like someone that's pretty serious about it, and came around and told me like 3 stories, so that they had and friends had. So the more we put it out there, the more of this information we can get, and the more we put out their stories, the more stories will start coming out. One of the recent Sasquatch Chronicle stories was, I think it's the most recent, maybe he has a new one out tonight, but it was about some little girl. She was like 2. Some monkeys came out of the woods and tried to drag her off, and her grandma or something, like, beat it with a broom until it let it go. And then dad came out and shot one, and the sheriff came out and said, "Oh, you just need to burn this body and bury it." And the guy was saying, this was like his girlfriend's story, but the guy was saying that she was the little girl.
Oh
So,
wow.
like, as far as he knows, the body's still buried out there on their property, which is crazy.
Wow.
And then I posted another, I don't know if you saw it, I posted another video on the blog talking about monkeys in the woods. These 2 little kids, this video's gone viral. My sister was big into this too, actually sent it to me. But it just came up in her Facebook feed. And it was 2 little boys, and it's going viral just because the 2 little boys are cute. They have Southern accents, and they're just arguing about how to say the word monkey. But it's super cute little video. But at the same time, nobody's asking the question. It's like the mom's asking the boys, "What'd you see?" And one little boy goes, "It was a deer." And the other little boy goes, "It was a monkey or a gorilla." She says, "What'd you see in the woods?" One little boy says, "It was a monkey or a gorilla." Well, why the heck is this little boy thinking he saw a monkey or a gorilla in the woods?
Yeah.
I mean, little kids don't just,
Yeah, I actually did see that video. I didn't watch it yet, but I did see it when I was reading the other blog post.
Yeah, it's not super long or anything, but it's just, a couple little back and forth. It was funny because it's like people arguing in the Bigfoot community, but they're like, four. Um,
Yeah.
one saying he saw a deer and the other one being like monkey. But, why did this little kid think he saw a monkey or a gorilla? And I think he even says something about, like at the zoo,
Wow.
but out in the
I'll have
woods.
to go back and watch that.
I couldn't figure out exactly where they were talking about they saw this, but I think one kid's from like South Carolina and the other one's from Georgia. So what
Huh.
did this little boy see? And then that, could go back to the story recently. I think it was from North Carolina, the little boy
Yeah.
that was like went missing and then said he saw a bear took care of him or whatever. What was that? Bears don't
Yeah, I
hate.
mean, he was missing for like 4 days in frigid weather, It was like a cold snap, and
Yeah,
it was below freezing every night. And he survives for 3 or 4 days, and then they find him.
it's
You
like
know,
three.
he was like right there or something, right where,
Right,
like in the woods behind his grandma's house or something, is where they found him, like
right.
where
Which
he
means
had been missing. Yeah.
whatever this was probably carrying him around and moving him around, and then
Yep.
bears are in hibernation at this point, and there's not even that many bears
And
in that
how are they?
area.
And how are they going to carry a 4-year-old boy around? You know?
Right. And and would they even do something like that, or would they be
Yeah.
like hungry? If a bear's out in at that time of year, it's because it hasn't had enough food to hibernate yet. So which
Yeah.
means it's probably not gonna nurture that baby. It's probably gonna have a snack.
Yeah.
Uh, so uh, yeah, that's one of the more interesting stories, and very on that sort of missing 411 kind of in
Yep.
that in that vibe. What's going on there? I mean, that Dennis Martin story, and I saw it on another show the other day. That was on Travel Channel, I think, but they completely left out that hikers saw a large, hairy, man-like creature running through the woods that seemed to be carrying something uh, right after this kid went missing, and then I think another family or something saw the kid way up on top of a mountain, like basically dangling off a cliff.
Oh
Uh,
wow. I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is all in the missing one of the, like maybe the first missing 411 book. Um, so he doesn't. Politis never makes any specific
Yeah.
statements, but I think particularly in that case, and you don't want to speculate too much because obviously families involved, but those two elements of that story that followed the initial disappearance are certainly lend itself to think that maybe that's what happened to this kid. Now, then you get into was it a female that are these creatures having problems giving birth to due to inbreeding or whatever? Are they having stillborn babies, and this is some sort of maternal instinct to take a child and replace the one that they lost? Are they eating them? Are they what's again, what's the motivation for taking children? Obviously, Native Americans on the Pacific Coast a lot of times say that they were eating them. That's something Kathy Strain talks about.
Right.
Um, Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, or whatever that book's called. But it's certainly an aspect of this phenomenon that's creepy.
Well,
And does that go back?
I'm
Yeah, go
pretty
ahead.
sure in that Dennis Martin case that when those people saw, I think it was they were at some creek and they heard a scream and then they saw this creature and they said, I believe the boy or something that initially saw it said it had something red, which he was wearing a red shirt. So I think there's a lot of it's interesting because I just recently got a comment on our YouTube channel for that episode where we talked about that case, and I'm trying to reach back out to that user because he had a very interesting theory on that whole case. So I'm hoping I can get him on and we can hear what he has to say about it. It's something I hadn't heard before, so I'm not gonna go into it too much, but
Sure.
we'll see what he comes back with. I'm hoping I can get him cornered and on here, but
Yeah.
that case really fascinates me. It's very interesting, especially as a kid. We did a lot of we were in that area.
Right.
Yeah, 3 or 4 times a year we went up there for little mini vacations and stuff. So
Yeah. That's and there's one story I think was on Sasquatch Chronicles about a kid's running a little bit further ahead of his father, going down a trail or something, and the trail opens up into like a meadow, and the kid just drops and basically starts having a seizure.
oh really?
And the guy runs up to his kid and then looks up, and across the meadow he sees a Sasquatch. Um, so, was that an infrasound thing?
Yeah,
Did the
that's what I
kid
was gonna
just
say.
did the kid see it and go into shock? But a lot of times the question is, well, how are these things taking kids and they're not screaming or whatever? Well, it could be something like that. It could be as simple as just like they say when they see deer kills, they're just snapping necks right off the bat.
Yeah.
Which is, wouldn't be anything for these creatures with a child. Um, so who knows, but it's certainly a creepy aspect of the whole thing. But like you said, they're probably just opportunist feeders, and chimpanzees will eat smaller monkeys. It's kind of the same idea, right?
Yep. Easy meals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
So
well, man, you guys, we got a lot to talk about. We're gonna have to do this in a separate show again, probably at some point.
I think so. I appreciate you taking the time. I didn't anticipate us being on the phone for 2 hours, but
Hey,
I'm
man.
glad you had the time, and we definitely will keep in touch and definitely do get back together. And if you, but we'll keep in touch, and if you have anything come up interesting, let us know. Give us a
Of
holler. We can
course.
get back on. We can do another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys want to go out uh, sometime and then over the next few months, let me know. I'm definitely trying to take some trips to some local
Okay.
hotspots and check things out. So
Yeah,
I want
I
to try
definitely
myself.
would still try. I definitely still want to try to get down to that um, Lake Marion area and talk to Glenn. He was going to show us the area where he had the the information where the guy had the sighting with the barrel burn and
Oh yeah.
the creature throwing the barrel and all this stuff. So
Oh yeah, for sure. Let
uh,
me know if you guys are headed that way and all.
yeah, I'd meant to do that over the holidays, but it was just too crazy around here. So yeah, we'll try to do that in the next couple months.
All
And
right. Yeah.
I would also like to get try. There's a guy here in Lexington um, who's very interested in the subject. I'd like to get you and him and maybe Mike Richburg if he has time, and just kind of have like a round table discussion,
Sure.
kind of what we
Yeah.
did tonight. But maybe I'll make sure everybody has plenty of time and just get together and hammer out the subject. But
Yeah, for sure. That sounds good to me.
definitely. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll
Hey.
definitely do that, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Sounds good, guys.
All right, man. Well, have a good night. I know there's not
You
much
too.
left of it.
That's all right. Great talking to you guys. It's good to
Yep.
have
Good.
other people
Yeah,
interested in this to talk to.
Yep. Good to talk to you
All right.
too.
of course.
We
All right,
appreciate it.
guys. Talk to you
All right.
soon. Bye.
See ya. Bye. We thank Trey for coming on and talking to us. It was fascinating. He's a wealth of information. He's been researching the subject a long time, and we look forward to talking to him. Again in the future. We definitely I keep in touch with him quite a bit, and we share information. What did you think, buddy?
I thought it was, it was extremely valuable talking to him. He has obviously done lots of research on multiple subjects, and he seems very well versed in not just kind of Bigfoot jargon and recent events, but in other cryptid and kind of more recent theories of things that are happening.
Oh yeah, I
is
think
really,
I was really impressed by his knowledge of scientific part of it.
Yeah.
Not just
Of
the creature
yeah.
and not just the U.S. Talking about
of divergent species and genetic,
Right.
all types of variations and things like that. It was very, it was really a good shot that we had, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with him as far as we get focused on the quote unquote Bigfoot, when reality is all these different species across the continents and the world that people are encountering um, are basically the same thing that we're having here, the same phenomena. And I think there's obviously a connection. I mean, there's something there. It's not just what we're experiencing here in the U.S. And there's more to it. I mean, and we need to get beyond in this area. We need to get beyond the bickering and the you know the thought that everybody fighting for a little piece of the pie, so to speak, and trying to claim that they're some expert when nobody's an expert. Nobody knows. Nobody's even proven that this exists. I mean, I believe it because of just the stuff I've heard from witness encounters. Not everybody can be making this stuff up, but for scientific to prove it scientifically, there's got to be more to it, and I think we're on a good path to get there.
Yeah, and Trey brought up a really good point of we need to stop, trying to define Bigfoot or not Bigfoot, because it's more than just, you can't classify Bigfoot as one thing. It's not like Bigfoot is this specific species and it's like this every time. Like he brought up the different size tracks, how it could be variation between male or female. It could be age variation. It could just be size variation. They're not all going to be the same size, like humans. If you look at, I'm not built the same as LeBron James. That's just not how it is. We don't have the same foot size. We're not as tall as each other. We have different weights. It's just, there's going to be variation. And there's so much, this doesn't line up with other, documented, or
it can't be that can't be real because that's not what they look like,
because it's not the same as another one that I saw, and the other one was more realistic seeming,
but then you have people that you have one encounter, somebody says it looks like Patty from the Patterson Gimlin film, then you have somebody says that mine looked like a Neanderthal. Well, mine looked like a chimpanzee. Well, mine looked like a baboon.
And if you think about it, statistically, there probably is, without a doubt, at least one roaming herd of primates in rural North America somewhere. Maybe not even highly evolved. What we talked about as in a Bigfoot, if you'll say, but maybe just like chimpanzees or orangutan or some. They're at least one group somewhere that we haven't seen. There's, like you said, 700 million odd acres of wilderness.
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess there's
it can't be that far-fetched that there's some group of chimpanzees or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty
out.
of people I know that have had chimpanzees or primates as exotic pets. I mean, as a kid, I knew somebody here, not in this town, but the town where I grew up. They had, we went to visit their house. They were friends of my parents, and we went to visit them. And I went with one of their daughters to a neighbor's house, and they had a chimpanzee.
Yeah,
that lived in a cage behind their house. And this was in the neighborhood.
What was the there was a store. They sold popcorn and peanuts and stuff.
Chromers.
Chromers. They, if I'm not mistaken, they had chimpanzee or
No, they didn't have chimpanzees. They had I think they were Reese's monkeys or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
But, I mean,
I used to love to go in there as a kid because they were up in a glass case, mounted up on the. It was like built into the wall up in the back of the store, and you could go in there and watch the monkeys.
yeah,
Now looking back, I was like, man, that was a
very
horrible life for those monkeys, but it was fun as a kid.
Yeah, a very exotic thing. Yeah.
There's an island, a barrier island off the coast of South Carolina. It's Monkey Island, and it's Reese's monkeys that were used for pharmaceutical testing, I guess, or medical testing. And this is a colony of monkeys that they put on this island, and they're remnants of those monkeys that were used for testing. And they live there. I mean, people taking pictures on boats, going around that area, and they come out to the edge of the water.
It seems like such a when you see videos and pictures, and you talk about primates, it seems like such a for people in the continental states, it seems very like such an exotic thing. Like millionaire have a pet chimpanzee or something. But it's crazy to think that there's places in the U.S. that there are just colonies of wild primates, that just exist and are living their lives.
I mean, theoretically, there could be. And obviously, there's a big bipedal something.
Yeah, there's
running
some
around
primates
in our
roaming around. Yeah,
that are bigger than your. I mean, some people say they look like chimpanzees. I mean, I think a lot of the people that encounter these things in eastern Texas claim that they're kind of chimpanzee type, or have claimed that. I don't know if all of them, but. To me, that would be scary as crap because chimpanzees are mean. They can be mean.
and baboons, and I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of them could be, but I mean,
Yeah.
chimpanzees. I mean, you saw what they did to that poor woman when that one attack that was supposedly a semi-domesticated animal, and it went off on that woman and like chewed her face off or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it was just devastating what this thing did to her. And you take something like that, and you make it 2 or 3 times bigger than that.
Yeah.
And instead of running around in the wilds of...
What do you do?
Yeah.
What can you do if you're out in the middle?
The only thing you can do is hope and pray that it doesn't come and decide to make a snack out of you.
Yeah. Just hope it doesn't see you.
You hope you have one of those encounters where it's a...
Just a passerby.
Yeah, it's a passive encounter where it just says, not interested.
Yeah,
I just
not
had
worth
an
it right
elk
now.
or just had a deer or something.
Yeah.
Pig or whatever. Yeah, obviously it's a fascinating subject, and it's something that we enjoy talking about. And it was great to talk to Trey, and it's obvious he has a passion for it also. So we're definitely going to keep that relationship and talking to him, and we're definitely going to get back together, and we're probably going to take him up on his offer to go out and do some stomping around, checking out things. Yeah, we got plenty of places around here where people have had encounters, and we know that they could potentially exist and supposedly have existed and do exist, so we'd be foolish not to go and take him up on that offer.
Yeah.
So, well, you got anything else, buddy, you want to add?
I think I'm done for the night.
All right. Well, as usual, if you have an encounter or have had an encounter or an experience or a story you'd like to share with us, please reach out to us. You can hit us on unexplained.reality@yahoo.com, which is our email address for the show here. Or you can get us on our website, which is unexplainedreality.com. Or you can hit us up on Facebook. We have a page there and a group for the show. We're on Instagram, Twitter. All those have direct message ability. So, just get in touch with us. We want to hear from you, and we'd love to talk to you. And I think that's going to be it for tonight.
Yeah.
And definitely check Trey out. Go out there and follow him on his Instagram account. That's Squatch Me Now. And check out his website, squatchmenow.net. And anyways, hope you guys have a good week, and we'll talk to you next time.
She's a little bit wild, she's spoiled like a child, and when she smiles, she shines like a sunflower. She's got beautiful eyes, and she uses those eyes like she's exercising some kind of superpower. Well, I knew from the first it was never gonna work, and it was gonna hurt, but still I said hello. And that dress she was in was so light and thin, like a whispering wind, and she looked so good in yellow. Oh, the days drifted by like the clouds in the sky, and it was summertime, and sometimes I still miss it. Yeah, I do. 'Cause she laid in my arms while I played my guitar on the hood of my car. She covered me with kisses. Oh, the love we made was a fiery race to a breathless place, but sometimes it was mellow. Man, that sunset there falling on her hair, God, I swear she looks so good in yellow. Oh, but I couldn't blame him, 'cause she was in that dress again, and she looked so